Panaki,
Hey, Chris, how you doing?
hello. Why does it feel so wrong to be an asshole at work? I do apologize for the strong language, and I promise we're not going to try to use that term again, or at least we're going to try to use it sparingly in this episode, because I just don't want to turn off too many listeners and have them drop off. But Panaki, I know that this word, it does evoke a strong visceral reaction. And my guess is that for most of us, it sparks sort of an image of a specific type of person, if not an actual person that you come across in life, or as we'll be discussing, in the workplace.
That's so true. That's probably why we get such a reaction to it. And yeah, everybody, I'm from New Jersey, so asshole is part of the regular terminology. I think I learned it in first grade or kindergarten or something like that when we was learning the letter A. Anyhow, I'll get it out of my system now. So thank you, Chris, for taming the explicit language in this, which could happen. But yes, we're talking about why does it feel so wrong to be an a-hole at work? And it's a really visceral, fun topic because no one really talks about it, and we should. And today we have an amazing guest with us. Today we have Chuck Gose. Chuck is the founder of Ecology. It's an amazing internal communications community that is thriving, and it's online, and it's such a great experience and such a great community. Chuck is one of the most creative, groundbreaking minds that I actually know. He's a community manager and an event creator like no one else I've known. And some people, like Brielle, our marketing manager here on this podcast, has said that Chuck is like the Taylor Swift of internal comms. So thank you so much for joining us today in this conversation, Chuck. How you doing?
Well, I'm good, and I will say I'm honored that you're doing a show about a-holes, and I'm the one that came to mind, because I think, going back to the Taylor Swift reference there, Panaki, I feel like there's some people that might think of her at times as a bit of an a-hole. I'm actually going to make this family friendly now. You guys both got to say it. I'm going to make it family friendly.
Thank you. All right.
Because I'm a bit of an a-hole at times, and I'm okay with that. But I know we're going to go much more deeper into this conversation. But thrilled to be here with you both.
Absolutely. And I think we all are and can be a-holes in different contexts and things like that. But the idea, or one of the ideas that spawned this episode, was from a talk that Chuck and I were thinking about doing several years ago. I don't know if you remember, Chuck. I think we called it the Cultural Toxicity Report. And it came from the idea that people believe that others in their work might be toxic. And we had this premise that it's not that other person is toxic. It's like chemicals. When we're together, something about the relationship becomes toxic. And like baking soda and vinegar coming together. So it's toxicity requires two substances in the right environment. And that's what kind of played into a lot of things to kind of get us here and stuff like that. Do you remember that?
Well, I do remember it. I thought it was a great topic. I think it scared the hell out of people because it's something, as you mentioned in the intro, people don't want to address it. They don't want to confront the challenge that might be there. It's easy to just keep burying it or letting it breed or letting it sit under the surface, even if it pops its ugly head up from time to time. So yeah, maybe one day, Panaki, maybe this podcast will be the thing that kicks it off.
Maybe, right? And I remember Chris, I remember last season or some point in one of our conversations, you were talking about your driving habits, and people might think that you're an aggressive driver or AKA an a-hole driver. Is that still the case?
Yeah, no, I was definitely...
Yeah.
I was definitely the worst. And there's something that I don't know what happened, but I just made this decision one day, because you start to get really hot and bothered after a while, and then it sort of affects the rest of your day. And I literally made a conscious decision. I'm going to be cool about this. I don't care if people cut me off or whatever. It's all good. Doesn't make any sense. So I made a conscious decision to morph from being an a-hole into much less of an a-hole today, at least as far as driving is concerned. But Chuck, I do want to welcome you to our podcast, Why Does It Feel So Wrong to Be Human at Work? And of course, welcoming everybody to our podcast. This podcast, of course, Panaki, this is where we get to examine life in the workplace and chat about things that do seem normal in the office, but really don't make a lot of sense anywhere else. So I'm Chris Lee, part of the employee experience and internal communication team at Gallagher Communication, and I'm joined here as always by my co-host and my good friend now, Pinaki Kathiari, who's part of an amazing team at digital communications agency, Local Wisdom. And today, of course, is a very special episode as we've got a special guest star in Chuck Gose. And I always like using the term very special episode because it reminds me of my childhood in the 80s. You remember those, like when sitcoms would sometimes come out with this quote unquote a very special episode, and the episode would kind of tackle tough subjects, and it was just a little bit out of character, right? I remember different episodes of like Different Strokes or Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, and you would tackle tough subjects. And I think being an a-hole at work, I'm so grateful that you're here, Chuck, because I think it's something that anyone that's been in a career for, a few years, I have to think, Chuck, that probably most of us at some point or other have dealt with a toxic personality.
I think absolutely. I think anybody, the longer you've been in a career, the more you'll have that experience. And Chris, to your point around being an 80s kid, when I first heard about these a-holes at work, I immediately flashed back to the classic scene from Spaceballs where Lord Helmet realizes he's literally surrounded by a-holes where he works. So he could keep firing a-holes, right? So some ways we're surrounded by my name, sometimes we're surrounded by personality, but it is a reality. And I think sometimes it's like the old joke that if you look around, there's a jerk in every room. And if you look around the room and you don't see one, it's probably you. So it's one of those things that there's a lot of self-awareness, I think, that comes with this word. And this word also takes many shapes and forms. One person's a-hole is another person's jerk, is another person's something else. And so it's more just that I kind of classified it as like incivility at work. We'll raise the bar above that and go into like the incivility aspect of it.
I like that, because that was one of the things I'd love to like talk about with you guys. It's like, one, like, how do you even define a-hole or a-holism, as we like to call it? Like, and I was thinking, like, are there like levels to like a-holes? Like, what's like level 1 versus like a level 5, or like level 5 is like you're just destructive physically or whatever, or Thanos want to snap the world out of
Pinaki,
existence.
are you suggesting that you have a black belt in being an a-hole? Like, is that
Right?
kind of the level that you're getting to, or
it's like a double black belt a-hole?
Well, now are we going Cobra Kai black belt type stuff? Or are we going like War Games DEF CON level? Like which this is now turned into a Gen X episode.
I know, seriously, right? It has. Well, it's like, say the worst, I guess, level would be something that's just like clearly abusive, clearly troublesome to your health, clearly like this is the person that we need to run away from because it's just dangerous. And like, so that one is somewhere else. That's like a nuke needs to go on that, and we just need to destroy that. But I think there are like levels of things. Like, for example, I was talking to someone the other day, and they were having some problems at work, cultural issues. And they were telling me the story of like, they had just started in this new job, and they were trying to work with this coworker, and that coworker wasn't producing what this person wanted. And there was just like multiple emails going back and forth. And at some point, this person was like, okay, I'm just going to CC the boss and just start saying this. And and I was just like, in this person's mind, thought that they were doing the right thing, and that's just what it is. But in my mind, I was like, well, again, I grew up in Jersey and in I guess an urban area, and I was like, one, no one likes a rat, and two, you pretty much just called both of these people out and called them incompetent without really saying it, because you're like saying to the managers, like, look, this person is incompetent, and two, you haven't seen this, don't you know it, right? So I think there's a little bit, but that might be like a level 1. I don't know. That's what got me thinking about this level thing. Does that make sense?
I also think it matters too at what level in the organization this is happening. If it's at the let's say a frontline level employee, not I don't want to say lower level, but like frontline level employee versus someone in senior management versus someone in the C-suite the impact of that a-holery has much bigger repercussions for it. It's sort of like the butterfly effect. Like where that happens could impact far greater numbers of people. But I think you're something even as simple as CCing someone,
Mm-hmm.
Panaki. That's some people might think that's a bit of a jerk move when it's unnecessary, or even worse than that, the BCC, because that's like the most subversive version of it, to where the other person doesn't even know. So I think it's one of those things like you actually don't get to decide. It's the other person that actually gets to
I
decide.
actually, it's interesting you mentioned that, Chuck, because I actually contributed to an article in Fortune magazine where we talked about how email can be weaponized in various ways in corporate culture. And I completely agree with you, Chuck. I do think it's absolutely it's a jerk move. And you can sort of see the how it manifests itself too, even in the language, just saying as you start to copy in the person's manager and saying, as requested last week, I'm still looking for that report. Can you do? And so there's this weird passive aggressive thing that happens that I don't think excuses you from getting labeled an a-hole, because it still has those great jerk properties.
There you go. That's level one, passive aggressive a-hole.
It's sort of like the per my last email dot
Yeah.
Yeah.
dot dot. Right. That's another example of that. Then again, people, I think they know what they're doing. They may not want to admit what they're doing. But to your point, Panaki, when you kicked it off, like there is clearly the kind that is dangerous and
Yeah.
threatening and all of that. And I think that's the type of stuff that everybody sees all the time, that there are policies that should
Mm-hmm.
be dealing with that. There are systems in place that should be helping with that. I think it's that stuff below that people may not realize, with good intentions, may not realize what they're doing other people aren't responding positively to. And I know there's things around like, I don't think anybody should ever intentionally be that, but I'm sure there are times, I'll self-reflect on this, where I'm pretty aggressive about what I'm working on. I don't like the status quo. I like to constantly change things. I like to tweak things. I like to nudge and push. And, there was even a time where there was a colleague of mine that I was working with that they were looking to build their voice and kind of push themselves out of their comfort zone. And so we started doing this video project together where her voice and video was lent to it. And she was in a joking manner, sort of saying like, "Oh, you pushed me off a ledge to get me to do that." And I was
Mm-hmm.
like, "No, no, 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 no. I built you a stage." Our perspectives were very different because I saw what I was doing from my point of view, but she saw it a little bit differently from
Yeah.
her point of view.
Chuck, I haven't known you as long as Pinaki has, but in the interactions I've had with you, you strike me as a visionary leader. And one of the thoughts that I had as we were thinking about this episode was that I wonder about your thoughts on whether or not are visionary leaders more prone to, not being as deliberate about, just showing respect or and being kind in interactions than other types of leaders? Because I can't help but think like when you have a strong vision for what you want and like vendors or employees that you're working with, they're just not getting it. It can get very frustrating very, very fast. And so I think that might be one of the ingredients that can lead to, and I love your term a-holery, and I'm gonna steal that for future use. So just letting you know. But what are your thoughts on that, Chuck? Do you think visionaries might be more at risk of being a jerk?
I think it's yes and no. So I'm going to be really wishy-washy in this, but I'm going to explain why. I think it's more about the friction that it causes. If a visionary is leading other visionaries, then no, because they're being pushed. They're wanting to be pulled. They're wanting to be drawn in. Now, if the people, I don't want to say that people that don't want change don't have visions on things, but like people that just want stuff to be just the way it is. We're good with how it is. They might then view that visionary very differently. No different than if I'm a leader who's very much about the status quo. We've got it in place. We're not making changes. What we're doing is working, but they've got some visionaries working for them. That's friction. And I think it's more of how do you work through that friction? Do you discuss it? Do you push it down? I think that's where that can happen. It's not a visionary or not. It's what's the vibe of the team, what's the culture of the team, and what's that friction causing?
What's that between you? And what you bring up is a good point. Like cultural differences kind of creates this friction. Like, for example, I know when we were kind of studying this topic before, I was reading research that was based on like couples who were married, and they talked about this like a couple that was French and Chinese, and like the French are open about arguments and debating while Chinese are not. So what happens when these two get together and there is a disagreement? One wants to openly argue about it, one wants to like shut down, and then how do they actually create that? So by no fault of their own, but just the culture that they were both brought up in and the type of things that they're used to, right? It's kind of similar to what you were talking about or here about like visionaries and non-visionaries. It's just like you're used to something, someone is used to something else. So what's normal for you is not normal for someone else. And what's almost normal for you could be seen as offensive to other people that way.
Well, and I think that the geographical differences, I think, also come into play. So going way, way, way back in my career when I worked at Rolls-Royce, obviously very heavily British contingent, but I was based in the US. The Brits thought we were the Wild West. Like we made decisions in meetings. We talked about something and then just went and did it. But then like our perspective on them was like, can we please do something? Can we please stop meeting about the meeting to decide the next meeting of the decision of the next, like it's just, but culturally, that's how different groups operate. And it was on another podcast recently that talked about how long the type of geographic cultural differences have existed. So they even went back to like, look who came to the US from Europe. It wasn't the people that were successful. It wasn't the people that had lots of money. It was the people that were risk takers. And so you now see that levied up today where you could see these cultural and geographical differences in play. Not that anybody's doing anything wrong, but that's just the way the operating system that people have. They're just used to breathing different oxygen out there.
That's a really interesting perspective, Chuck. And I think as workplaces, a lot of the efforts to create more diverse and inclusive workplaces, I think a lot of people come with different lived experiences, different cultures. Pinaki, you were talking about the culture growing up in New Jersey, and I'm from Toronto in Canada. And, one distinct characteristic of personality of Canadians is we generally tend to overdo it in terms of politeness. And then, just back to that earlier thought about sometimes it does come across in a passive aggressive manner, like, i.e., I'm sorry, but do you mind not swinging your axe near my child? Or, that kind of thing where like there's an apology and there's no reason to apologize, but it's almost over-indexing on trying to be polite and not just being, with just good, brute, blunt force, just saying that's dangerous. Put your axe away.
Yeah. Yeah. Because perception is a big thing. I remember like a long time ago at Local Wisdom when we were trying to set up our own HR, we had this business consultant and he ran us all leadership through like these personality tests. I don't remember which one it was, but when he was explaining it to me, it's like Panaki's, the way his test came back, it says that, you think really fast and you decide really fast. And I was like, yeah, it's true. Very good. Cool. And he was like, but some people might see that as you're like impetuous or could just do dangerous things. And some people might be afraid of that. So you have to keep other people's perceptions in mind while you're talking through it. Like I know things before other people know things. I've had enough time to get used to this before other people. So it's been a thing about being mindful of how like I'm approaching it or talking to it. So I think one of you said it earlier, this kind of knowing where you start is really important. So maybe we could get into like what we can do when we're kind of like faced with a holery in the workplace. How do you even, because we can look at it from like both sides too, because like I like we all alluded to, we could all be a-holes. And I think it could happen on purpose. Like I could purposely say I'm going to be an a-hole. I don't do that. Most of us, I don't think do that. I hope. But there's also, we're an a-hole because we're now pushed against a corner. There's some kind of stress or factor that's bringing us here. And the third is we're an a-hole because we made a mistake, because that could happen. because I could mistakenly cut somebody off in my car or something like that. And I'm like, oh man, I'm sorry. But person doesn't know that I'm sorry. That person could think that, you know what? He's a jerk. That type of thing. So what can we do? Have you faced a-holery and how have you dealt with it in both
Well,
forms?
first off, I want Chris to write a book called "Put the Axe Away: A Canadian Philosophy on Business."
Has to start
Because
with
I
I'm
think that
sorry though. It has to start with the
I'm
apology.
sorry.
That's the I'm
That's
sorry.
right. Good call. Good call. I think it's before we get into the next question, I think it's good to call out, like, set some rules of the road. So you're in interactions with people. Like
Mm-hmm.
when I see teams actually get together and have great meetings, they sort of say, like, this is our operating system. This is how we're going to work together. This is how we're not
Nice.
going to work together. And it sets the rules of the road for everyone, to get back to your driving example, where when you're cutting somebody off in your car, the odds of you seeing that person again are most likely minuscule, outside of a dramatic road rage incident. I hope you never see that person again. Whereas at work, you're going to see that person on the next Zoom or the next meeting or the next day. So the consequences of that a-holery are so much greater at work, I would say, than potentially outside of work, in the
Mm-hmm.
context of like how people act. I've always, when I was thinking about this question, Panaki, I've always described myself as something as the bully's bully.
Hmm.
I like getting along with people. I like being kind. I like being empathetic. I like being all those things. Not everybody is. So I like not being those things, the people who aren't those things.
Oh,
Because, not to say that that is the most mature response, that is not what any therapist would probably say to do, but my, even going back to being in elementary school, I can remember when we sort of learned the word bully and what that looks like and feels like, wanting to bully the bully, wanting to, like, as if I'm going to somehow teach them a lesson, and a third grader is going to learn that. So I think that it's all over understanding, like, what is your natural response to it? Do you, is it a fight or flight
mm-hmm.
situation? For some people are like, man, there's an a-hole there. I'm out. I'm done. And I'm not saying one is more right than the other, but I think it's good for people to understand which one are you. If you encounter a rough individual or a rough team and you don't like the way they do business, you don't like the way they operate, are you just going to be like, bye, see ya?
Mm-hmm.
Or are you going to take a step in and have potentially maybe a difficult conversation?
Yeah,
No, I love that.
dude. I want to answer that.
When I think about there's so many different types of personalities in the workplace, and I think it's important for people to remember that, we are coming armed with different ways of approaching things and potentially different cultural backgrounds and things like that. But I think, and I like the thing that we talked about in the beginning, which is like, how do we define what an a-hole is? Because I think there's a fine line between just being blunt versus being an actual jerk, where you're not thinking about how emotionally it can impact somebody or someone can be sensitive towards. And I did recently see an article in Forbes that talks about how there's many leaders who exhibit traits of being quite literally a psychopath. And before we go too far with this, because I think when people hear the word psychopath, they have visions of like serial killers and things like that. But I wanted to get this right. So Google AI described it as a person with a personality disorder that involves a lack of empathy, remorse, and guilt. And psychopaths may also be manipulative, deceitful, and impulsive. And so when I think about some leaders that have a lot of these traits, I wonder if, psychopathy, if that's something that is like a key ingredient on the path to being an a-hole.
There's so many things that you guys said I want to kind of like jump back on. If I kind of try to go backwards from it, type of thing, if I can. I think a few episodes ago, I think we were talking about honesty, and I was going into like some of the history of it. And like around the 80s, there became this like movement, like this Wolf of Wall Street stuff, where it became okay to be dishonest. Like it became the norm for people to like, or business people to cheat and lie in order to get extra ahead. And a lot of folks who kind of got ahead back then are still here today, right? Like, I mean, we know the 80s, and that started a thing that made it okay to do this. Now, so if you think about it's okay to be that a-hole in order to make money, then you add it on to this psychopathy thing that Chris just talked about, where the issue isn't that I am trying to be an a-hole. The issue is that I don't know that
Mhm.
I'm registering like pain in you, right? So that type of bluntness kind of allows me to not care and just kind of keep doing these actions, and then I'm becoming more profitable or growing and things like that. So it's kind of like a one thing led to another type of thing as well, I think. Does that make sense?
I think there's a little bit of I think that's a little bit of learned behavior for those that have it existed during that time. I think there's that element of, well, this is how you succeed.
This is how you
This is
succeed.
how
You
you get
gotta
there. I think there's others though, and this has been a great topic because it's caused me to self-reflect a lot on my career experiences. And there was a time early in my career that I actually was my worst employee performance review ever. Ever. It was so hard to read what my peers were saying about me, about not being empathetic or not getting their input or all of it was this litany of things. And I'm like, man, is that really me? And it was, but it wasn't. It was because what was happening away from work, where I had been in a car accident and was dealing with chronic pain in my shoulder, like chronic pain for a year. And I realized after I'd had surgery and the pain went away, I was like, man, I was an a-hole for an entire year not because of what was happening at work, but what was happening away from work. So when we think about the workplace, yes, that person might be an a-hole there, but it might not be that. It might be what's happening outside of work. And I think that's where the empathy needs to come in. That's where their a-holery is not about
Mm-hmm.
me. It's
Absolutely.
about something with them, and that's their problem to deal with. Maybe you can help them deal with it, maybe you can't. But it's not your problem to solve. Maybe you can help them solve it, but it's actually not about you. It's more a reflection on them.
It's true. Like I think I said this story once a while ago, but I was like in a meeting once with a client. Typically, I don't get involved with this client, but this person was amazingly upset. He was yelling at the team. I've just never seen him this way. And
By this way, this wasn't me. For this,
it
he's
was
talking about
not
the
you.
story. This
It wasn't. It wasn't. It wasn't Chuck. It wasn't Chris either. Although I want to see Chris in his like road rage mood and see what that's like. That would be really funny, I think. But afterwards we went out to lunch, and I was like, hey, I just kind of said, listen, I've never really seen you like that. Is everything okay? And he just like smiled and laughed, and like his just shoulders went down. He actually didn't answer my question, but the assholery or like he just kind of like calmed him down, and maybe it was just kind of one of the things to like make him look at himself and say, wow, was I really like that? So just even to acknowledge it, I think is an interesting thing. So even kudos to your coworkers back there, colleagues
Mhm.
who put that review, because that takes true bravery to do that. And I
It
think if
also
I,
shows what a jerk I must have been
yeah,
for them to put that in there, honestly.
exactly. And but to so the kind of keeping an eye on the pain or empathy that someone else might be having that might be causing the issue is a thing that we have to kind of contemplate, because I think as humans we're always thinking the dramatic one. Oh, he's just an a-hole and that's just what it is. That's like the easy thing to think about. But to think, is he in pain? Is there something going on and we should dig into, is a big thing. Because even when you brought up like the bullying in school, like grammar school, I think you're right. Like bullies and people who push actually do push and allow you to grow. It was kind of like two stories. The person who I would call my bully in grammar school really ended up sticking up for me in a really big way in high school. And in high school, like I was on the football team and I went to my coach, who was also the vice principal of the school. And I was like, hey, I think I need to quit. There's so much going on. My studies are lacking. I have work, etc. And he was like, no, I'm not going to let you quit. And if you don't show up to practice, you're going to get detention. And I was like, what an a-hole thing to say. But you know what? We won state championships that year. And like he prevented me from having a regrettable decision at that moment, right? So we have to kind of look at it from both sides as well.
I think the thing about, and I like what you're saying, Chuck, about how there's other things that are leading to a-holery that people don't always see, and it's a great reminder for people to. It's like, well, I've known Chuck a long time, and I know he's not normally like this, but there's other factors as well that I think could lead to all of us in different situations being a little bit out of character, particularly in times of like high stress, time pressures, in times of crisis. A lot of people start to revert to being a little bit more short and curt in their interactions with people, not being as considerate. And there's a version of us. It's kind of like with this idea of road rage, where I think for a lot of people that are prone to road rage, I think for most of them, it's likely uncharacteristic of them. And then there's other people, of course, that's just they're road ragey everywhere, even if they're not on the road. That's just who they are. But I do feel like there's a lot of factors that also can contribute to increased levels of a-holery.
That's right. Yeah. This like I think one of the things that I keep in mind when I'm in meetings or any situation is my heart rate. So I am always kind of thinking about my heart rate, especially when it starts to elevate. So if I'm in a meeting or a scenario where my heart rate is elevating, it's kind of a trigger moment for me to pause and be like, wait, what's going on? Why is this happening? And so especially in like meetings when there's people, this is where I would like, okay, something is happening that's causing my heart rate to elevate. That means that other people might be in the same place. So let me pause what we're actually doing or talking about to see if I could acknowledge this first before then moving on. Because like when there's something awkward in a situation and it's not acknowledged, it makes it more awkward and it makes it bigger in that way. So that's kind of one of the things that I have found really helps, because I think you can't get anywhere in work or the world without relationships. And when your heart rate is up, that's when you're really prone to do something that's going to mess up that relationship.
I want to go back to something when I mentioned at the beginning and bring this back to the Gen X conversation around Spaceballs. And for those who haven't seen Spaceballs, please go watch it. But the scene when Lord Helmet is talking about that he's surrounded by a-holes, what he's saying is all the people in their last name is a-hole.
It's so like Major A-hole, Sergeant
right,
A-hole.
Major A-hole, Captain A-hole, right. So that's the joke. However, this has got me thinking about, if you feel like Lord Helmet and you're surrounded by a-holes, are you hiring a-holes, or is it being bred inside your organization? Are people learning how to be a-holes in your organization? I think that's the biggest challenge now facing companies, is especially with this shift between remote and hybrid and in office and which is it and all this back and forth stuff that's going on. Are people learning that? Are they learning that, oh, this is how you get ahead? Oh, this is the behavior that my leaders are demonstrating, therefore this is how you do it? Or is it that a-holes like other a-holes, and so a-holes also know other a-holes, and so that's just who gets brought into the company? And I think that's what can very easily grow or derail a company in no time.
Yep.
Is if you end up with a bunch of people, not that are a-hole by last name, but a-hole by character, that could very easily stop all productivity, kill company culture, and any measurable success of the organization would be torn down at that point.
I absolutely love that, Chuck, and it's a great sort of concluding thought as we could have this conversation forever, honestly. But I think the idea that a-holery, I think this term's going to catch on, by the way. I think that a-holery as an idea that can spread like a cancer within a workplace culture, and a lot of it does start from the top down. And I think part of the reason why it might start from the top is that, I think, and it just reminds me, Panaki, of that time we were talking about that Simon Sinek video on YouTube where he was talking about one of his clients being the Navy SEALs and how one of the comments that he made that I thought was really interesting is that organizations have lots and lots of measures for, evaluating somebody's performance, but they don't have that many measures for other things like trust with their teams. And I think if all you do is over-index on performance as, a measure of your competency in a role, I think a lot of leaders, especially toxic leaders, without having any sort of checks and balances on their own behaviors and how it impacts teams, sometimes they can just sort of bubble to the top and without realizing that, if there's high turnover rates or low morale or low engagement, that, there's something else that's at play here. And so again, like I think because it's coming from the leadership, I think in a high performance culture, there's always that risk that this starts to spread as managers see, okay, that's the type of behavior that gets rewarded. And you can't help but be part of this culture that's been building. And there's that dark triad of personality traits that are sometimes overrepresented in upper management. We talked about psychopathy, but there's also elements of narcissism, Machiavellianism, and a lot of these I think are probably ingredients in that a-hole recipe. And the main idea that I think about is that the missing ingredient that a lot of a-holes are missing is just that fundamental lack of respect for others, which I think is the foundation for empathy. And of course, that will eventually lead to trust in relationships with leadership.
I agree. Although I'm not sure that sometimes a-holes are doing it on purpose. And the reason I say so is because, we have a young child, and that gets me in front of parents. And because I have a young child, I'm in front of new parents, first-time parents quite a lot. And so I kind of think about raising kids who are not a-holes, right? Because one of the things you realize about parents and children is that children are crying because they need something, and parents' instinctive reaction is to get upset and frustrated and angry, and that sometimes shows off on them. So now, as a child growing up, if I need something, if I'm in pain or need help, and the reaction I see is I'm getting yelled at, then I'm going to start mimicking that behavior. It's just going to come inside me. So something to think about, even as we're kind of working with every other human being, including our own children. Let's think about how we're acting, because we don't want to perpetuate assholery now, not only to our kids, but not to our coworkers or anything like that. So with that said, let me kind of go, before we kind of wrap up and get into that Wisdom Feels So Right segment, just want to thank you all for listening. I hope you laughed a few times, and I hope you had some introspective on yourself and relationships with people around you. Thank you to digital communications agency Local Wisdom for believing in this podcast and doing all that work so we could make this happen. One of my new favorite analogies for Local Wisdom is that we're the spackle for communication teams. We fill in gaps and spaces that make your team stronger. Friends, Chris and I also bring these important conversations into the workplace and private workshops and conferences. So if you want to make a change in your organization, if you want to have us speak at your conference, take the first step. whydoesitfeelsowrong.com. Take us a look, give us a look. Let's go into the Wisdom That Feels Right series. This is where we're just kind of talking about books, resources, or anything like that that's going to help educate us, our listeners, on the topic. I have a few in mind, but let me see if, Chuck, you have anything that you'd love to share.
So we already have 3 movie recommendations for everyone. You've got to watch War Games. You've got to watch Spaceballs. And please watch the entire Karate Kid movie series and Cobra Kai on Netflix. That's great content right there in and of itself. So that's not work-related, fun-related. However, work-related stuff, I'm excited that I'm now partnering with Ginny Field, who's a known communications voice in the UK and a friend of mine, that we have a podcast called Frequency, and it is all about the world of internal comms, employee experience, and HR, where we are open to having the difficult conversations and want to have the difficult conversations that we don't hear other people having. So if you want to add another podcast to your listening list, go check out Frequency.
Nice.
I love that,
And
Chuck.
I have to echo the Karate Kid, because as I was thinking about the relationship between Daniel and Mr. Miyagi, I was just like, Mr. Miyagi was a bit of an a-hole. He's making this kid, this high schooler, just do stuff without explaining it to him. And I was thinking, what would a high schooler today, how would they react to that?
Well, parents would call the cops for one, because it was like unpaid labor for one. Anyway, we digress.
Whole other digression there, because there's a whole line of topic that says that the main character, Daniel, is actually the a-hole in this story. Watch
Correct.
it and then come back to Chuck and
I've seen that on YouTube, and Johnny Lawrence is actually sort of the victim in all this, because I think, speaking of Cobra Kai, it's really cool to see the Johnny Lawrence character arc where he is really your prototypical a-hole. I mean, that's his role, that's his archetype. But I was shocked at how the high quality of the show Cobra Kai, and just the quality of that character Johnny Lawrence and his evolution out of a-holery and just kind of moving his way along that spectrum. I would say for me, the wisdom that feels right, I would echo, obviously, have to watch War Games, have to watch, I think Spaceballs is so deep on so many levels, and you won't get it until you watch it. I think that's important. And then definitely, if you haven't had much of opportunity to interact with Jenny Field and Chuck Ghost, I think Frequency is a podcast I'm definitely looking forward to checking out, Pinocchio. And then the one other thing was I did mention this Forbes article that I read. So I found it, and it's called "The Psychopaths Who Lead Us," and it does a great exploration in workplace, but more specifically leadership culture, and why so many leaders are often either psychopaths or a-holes.
Love that. Oh, scary times. Some things for me. A book to think about is How to Be a Gentleman. It's basically a book on etiquette for men. There's also How to Be a Lady, and this is by a gentleman by John Bridges. Something definitely worth checking out. The whole premise is how do you act in order to kind of keep everyone comfortable around you. Another one that I think would be a good read is Strong, Calm, Confident You by Kelsey Buchholz. It's really a book about ending the cycle of people pleasing and burnout, because once we're at this burnout place, it's really easy for us to go into assholery. And, I kind of talked a little bit about parenting, and I wanted to call out a toy, and it's called Wonderwell. It's a toy for young children, and it's like similar to Elf on a Shelf, but in reverse and with a mouse. So basically, there's a mouse that shows up in your house, and it's a game that teaches children how to be kind and welcome that mouse instead of fearing its watchful eye. I met the CEO and founder, Jana Hallam, and it's a wonderful application of business and social good. So check it out, wonderwell.com. And that takes it up for our episode for today on a-holism. Any final words before we close out?
Well, I would just say anytime you guys need another a-hole to join your podcast, you need it all.
Chuck, I just on behalf of Pinocchio and the team here at Why Does It Feel So Wrong to Be Human at Work, of course, I want to thank you for your time today and your wisdom and deep experience in a-holery. I do want to have a big shout out and a thank you to our amazing producer and your colleague, Pinocchio, Brielle Saracini. And also just want to extend our thanks to our friends in the booth at SBX Productions. So Bill, Vince, Taylor, thanks for all the great things that you do. And for the rest of you that are joining us here, Pinocchio and I, we'd love to continue this chat on workplace culture, being an a-hole. So we'd love to hear your thoughts. Just connect with us, write, review, subscribe. You can find us on whydoesitfeelsowrong.com. And we look forward to chatting more. And we'd love to hear about your experiences with a-holes in the workplace. So thanks very much, and we'll catch up with you next time.
Thank you very much. And just remember, whoever you are, whether you're an a-hole or not, we can all learn to accept and understand each other and get along and maybe even enjoy and grow together. life for me is about unity. So thank you, and good vibes your way, everyone.